The Harris County Courthouse simmered under Houston's August sun as Officer Karen Voss smirked, her wiry blonde frame taut with victory. Jalen Carter, a black man in a crisp gray suit, stood convicted of assaulting her, the judge's gavel slamming down 10 years. His calm nod hid a glinting secret. A clerk whispered to the judge, who paled, clutching a file, halting everything. Karen gloated, blind to the unraveling truth. What could shatter her win and scar Jalen's future forever? Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if you stand for justice, hit like and subscribe, because tomorrow's wild episode will leave you stunned. The sun dipped low over Houston's 3rd Ward, painting the sky a bruised orange as Jalen Carter gripped the cracked steering wheel of his rusty blue pickup truck. It was 3 weeks before that sweltering courtroom clash, and the air hung thick with humidity, sticking to his skin like a second shirt. At 35, Jalen carried the quiet grit of a man who'd spent years bending metal and mending engines in his small garage, proving every doubter wrong with calloused hands and a steady gaze. His close-cropped hair gleamed with sweat, and his broad shoulders sat easy under a faded black tee, relaxed after a long day fixing a client's busted radiator 5 miles down the road. The truck rattled over potholed streets, engine growling low, a familiar hum that matched the rhythm of his breathing. He was just a man heading home, craving the cool of his porch and the sound of Nia's voice drifting from the kitchen. But trouble had a way of sniffing him out, and tonight it crouched in wait, coiled tight and ready to strike. 3 blocks from his turn, a patrol car hugged the curb near a sagging barbershop, its neon sign flickering in the dusk. Officer Karen Voss sat behind the wheel, her wiry frame taut as a bowstring, her buzzed blonde hair catching the last slivers of light. At 43, she'd worn her badge for 15 years, a shield she'd polished with every bitter grudge she nursed, especially against men like Jalen. Her narrow, hazel eyes tracked him through the windshield, hawk-like, zeroing in on the pickup's dented fender and the way it rolled too smooth for a neighborhood she'd pegged as a cesspool of thieves and hustlers. Something about Jalen's easy posture, the way he didn't slouch or strut, twisted a knot in her gut. He didn't belong in a truck that nice, not here, not in her world where black men were supposed to shrink or break under her stare. She didn't like it one bit. Her fingers flicked the switch, headlights slicing through the dimness, and she eased the cruiser forward, tires crunching gravel as she tailed him, her lips curling into a thin, sharp line. Jalen slowed at a stoplight, the red glow bathing his cab in a faint crimson wash. He tapped the wheel, humming to the low thrum of a blues tune leaking from the radio, when Karen's beam stabbed through his rear window. The cruiser slid alongside, her window buzzing down with an electric whine. She leaned out, her voice slashing the evening stillness like a jagged blade. "Got a broken taillight, sir," she barked, her tone clipped and cold, the "sir" dripping with venom. Jalen turned his head slow, meeting her glare with calm brown eyes, his brow lifting just a fraction, a ripple of doubt creasing his forehead. "I don't think so, officer," he said, his words even, polite but firm, honed from years of keeping cool under pressure. "I had it serviced last week, checked it myself this morning." The truth hung there, steady as stone, but Karen's jaw tightened, her teeth grinding at the sound of his unshaken voice. She didn't like that either. Didn't like how he wasn't rattled, wasn't scrambling to kiss the ground she walked. Her door swung open with a creak, and she stepped out, boots thudding hard on the pavement, kicking up dust that swirled in the fading light. Her hand rested on the holster at her hip, fingers twitching like they itched to pull steel. "Step out of the vehicle," she ordered, her voice thick with authority she assumed he'd bow to, her wiry frame squared up like she owned the street. Jalen exhaled, soft, a whisper of air slipping past his lips, his fingers pausing on the wheel before curling around the door handle. He knew this dance, had known it since he was 16, stopped for looking suspicious 2 streets from his mama's house, with a backpack full of library books. He pushed the door open, climbing out slow, standing tall at 6'2", his frame filling the space between truck and cruiser. His grey sneakers scuffed the asphalt, his faded tee clinging to his chest, the crisp lines of his posture unbroken, even as the air thickened with her malice. He faced her, hands visible, palms open at his sides. "Can I ask what this is about?" he said, his voice steady as the concrete under his feet, a question wrapped in steel. Karen squared her shoulders, her thin lips twisting into a sneer, her wiry build buzzing with irritation she couldn't shake. "You're in a high-crime area. Driving slow, looking like you don't belong," she snapped, her words a string of lies spun from thin air. "I need to see some ID." It was nonsense, every syllable a fiction she didn't bother to hide. The third ward wasn't some gang-riddled slum. Not tonight, not here, with kids kicking a ball 3 houses down and old men sipping sweet tea on stoops. But she saw a black man in a truck that didn't scream poverty, and that was enough for her twisted lens. Jalen's lips pressed into a tight line, a flicker of heat sparking in his chest. But he nodded, moving slow, deliberate, reaching for the wallet tucked in his back pocket. "I live 5 miles from here," he said, offering his license, the plastic glinting under the streetlight. Karen snatched it, her fingers brushing his with a roughness that wasn't accidental, barely glancing at the name Jalen Carter, before tossing it onto her cruiser's hood like it was trash. "Sure you do," she muttered, her sneer widening, venom seeping into the words as she stepped closer. A small crowd trickled out from the barbershop across the street, drawn by the flashing lights, a mix of curious teens in baggy shorts and older folks clutching cups of lukewarm coffee. Some whispered, low murmurs of, "Here we go again," while others pulled out phones, lenses glinting as they started recording, a silent jury forming in the dusk. Karen noticed, her chest puffing out a little more, the attention feeding her like oxygen to a flame. "Hands on the car," she snapped, her voice rising, sharp with stale coffee breath as she closed the gap. Jalen frowned, his patience fraying at the edges, threads of tension pulling tight in his jaw. "Officer, I've done nothing wrong," he said, his tone still intact, a rock against her tide. "You haven't told me what I'm suspected of." Her hazel eyes flashed, irritation boiling over into something darker, a fury sparked by his refusal to cower, to bend like she demanded. "I said hands on the car now," she growled, her hand twitching toward the baton dangling at her belt, the black stick gleaming under the streetlight. Jalen sighed, a slow, deliberate sound that scraped the air, his shoulders shifting as he turned, placing his palms flat on the pickup's warm hood. The metal burned against his skin, a faint pulse of heat sinking with the thud of his heart. He'd been here before, knew compliance was the only path out, even if it scorched his insides. Like a live coal, pride sizzling in the ashes. Karen didn't hesitate, didn't pause to think or warn. She grabbed his wrist, twisting it hard behind his back, her nails digging into his flesh like claws, leaving red crescents as she slapped cuffs on him with a metallic clank that echoed. "Off the brick walls." "You're resisting," she hissed, her voice a venomous lie, though he hadn't moved an inch beyond her barked orders, his body still as a statue under her grip. Jalen winced, the steel biting into his wrists, cutting sharp where the cuffs twisted tight, but he kept his voice low, a thread of iron holding it steady. "I'm not resisting," he said, each word measured, precise. "You're making a mistake." Karen shoved him hard against the truck, his cheek slamming into the cool metal with a dull thud, her elbow jabbing his ribs for good measure, a jolt of pain ripping through his side. "Keep talking, tough guy," she spat, her face inches from his, her breath hot and sour against his ear, a rancid mix of coffee and spite. The crowd grew louder, some muttering curses under their breath, others shouting, "Let him go," their voices a jagged chorus cutting through the night. A lanky kid in a red cap yelled, "Get him!" egging her on, grinning like it was a cage fight. Jalen stayed silent now, his mind racing, gears turning behind his still eyes, his body locked rigid, knowing any twitch could turn this into a bullet. Or a body bag, a lesson carved into him from too many nights like this. Karen stepped back, brushing her hands together like she'd wiped off filth, her smirk creeping back as she hauled him toward her cruiser. "Suspicious behavior," she announced to the onlookers, her voice loud, theatrical, ringing over the hum of engines and the buzz of phones. "Possible burglary suspect." It was pure nonsense, a script she played for the cameras, and it landed with the louder voices in the crowd, a few clapping, nodding, their cheers a sick applause. She shoved Jalen into the back seat, his broad frame folding awkwardly into the tight space, his knees jamming against the partition as she slammed the door, the sound bouncing off the barbershop's chipped facade. The drive to the precinct was short, 7 minutes through Houston's tangled streets, the city lights smearing past in streaks of gold and red. Karen radioed in, her voice clipped, smug. Bringing in a resistor, male, black, mid-30s, detain on MLK Boulevard. The dispatcher crackled back, bored, just another night in the third ward. Jalen sat in silence, his cuffed hands numb, pins pricking his fingers as blood slowed. His mind churned, already mapping what came next. He knew this wasn't the end, not by a mile. Karen had no clue who she'd just snared, but he did. He'd faced worse, stared down bigger wolves with sharper teeth, and he'd learned to wait, to watch, to strike when the iron was hot. She thought she'd won this round, thought she'd caged him tight, but she'd just lit a match in a room, full of gas. The precinct loomed ahead, a squat brick fortress, and as she dragged him out, her grip rough on his arm, Jalen let a faint flicker of something dangerous spark in his chest. This stop, this lie, was just the beginning. And what came next would burn brighter than she could ever imagine. The next morning broke heavy over Houston's third ward, a grey haze clinging to the streets as Jalen Carter slumped on the sagging couch in his modest living room, the faint hum of a box fan stirring the sticky air. His wrists still ached, red welts blooming where Officer Karen Voss's cuffs had bitten deep the night before, a brutal reminder of her fabricated stop. The pickup sat outside, its hood still warm from her rough hands, parked crooked against the curb of their shotgun. House, its peeling yellow paint a quiet defiance against the neighborhood's wear. At 35, Jalen was a man of iron will, forged in the heat of a garage where he bent steel and silenced skeptics. But now his broad shoulders sagged, his close-cropped hair damp with sweat that wouldn't dry. His faded black tee clung to his chest, the ache in his ribs pulsing with every breath, a souvenir of Karen's elbow jabbing him into submission. He stared at the coffee table where his phone glowed with a text from his wife, Nia. "Home soon, we fight this." Her words were a lifeline, but the weight of the precinct's cold cell still pressed on his lungs. The front door creaked open, and Nia stepped in, her nurse's scrubs wrinkled from a 12-hour shift at Mercy Hospital, her braided hair pulled tight in a bun that gleamed under the dim bulb overhead. At 33, she carried a fierce resolve in her slender frame, her dark eyes sharp with a fire that could burn through steel. She dropped her bag, the thud echoing off the scuffed hardwood, and crossed the room in 3 strides, her sneakers squeaking faintly. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft but edged with steel, her hand brushing his shoulder as she sank beside him. Jalen nodded, his steady gaze lifting to meet hers, a flicker of gratitude warming his chest. "Been better," he said, his tone low, gravelly, the calm he'd clung to last night fraying at the edges. Nia's lips pressed tight, her fingers curling into a fist as she pulled his phone closer, the screen still lit with notifications that wouldn't stop buzzing. "They filmed it, Jalen," she said, her breath catching. "The whole damn stop. It's everywhere." He blinked, his brow furrowing as she tapped the screen, pulling up a video already racking up 50,000 views in the 10 hours since Karen had hauled him off. The shaky footage rolled, a streetlight casting jagged shadows as Karen barked. Hands on the car, her wiry blonde frame slamming him against the pickup's hood, his cheek grinding into the metal. Her voice snarled, "You're resisting," a lie so bold it stung even through the grainy pixels, her hazel eyes glinting with spite as she twisted his arm, cuffs snapping shut. The crowd's murmurs swelled, a teen shouting, "Let him go," phones flashing like fireflies in the dusk. Jalen watched, his jaw tightening, a slow burn igniting in his gut as the clip looped her sneering, "Know your place," her hand slipping a baggie of weed into his pocket, subtle but damning under the camera's unblinking eye. Nia's breath hitched, her nails digging into her palm. "She planted that," she whispered, fury trembling in her voice. "We've got her." Jalen leaned forward, his elbows digging into his knees, the ache in his ribs flaring as he stared at the numbers. "Climbing?" 60,000, 70,000, hashtags like Justice for Jalen and End Racist Cops, flooding the comments. How'd this blow up so fast, he muttered, his mind racing, gears grinding as he pieced it together. Nia grabbed his dashcam from the truck last night, a hunch she'd followed after he'd called from the precinct. I uploaded this too, she said, swiping to a second clip, crystal clear from the cab's angle. Karen's cruiser tailing him, her headlights glaring, her voice barking lies about a taillight he'd fixed himself. No push, no fight, just her slamming him down, the baggie slipping in like a thief's hand. 80,000 views now, the internet erupting, comments blazing. She's a liar. Cops like her ruin lives. Jalen's chest loosened, a faint spark of triumph flickering as he watched the tide turn. This could get me out, he said, his voice rising, hope threading through the cracks. By noon, the story hit local news, vans clogging the street outside the Houston precinct, their satellite dishes piercing the muggy sky. Reporters in crisp blazers shouted questions at stone-faced officers milling behind the glass doors, the buzz of outrage crackling through the city. Nia stood on their porch, her arms crossed, the humid air plastering her scrubs to her skin as she watched the chaos unfold on her phone. A station anchor with a slicked-back pompadour broke the update. Officer Karen Voss suspended pending. Investigation after viral video shows excessive force and possible evidence tampering. Jalen stepped out beside her, the sun searing his neck, his steady gaze tracking a protest swelling 2 blocks away, 300 voices chanting his name. Fists pumping in the thick heat. "They're with me," he said, his tone lifting. A rare grin tugging at his lips as he felt the weight shift, the system bending under the glare of a million eyes. Nia squeezed his hand, her fingers trembling but warm, her smile cautious, yet alive with possibility. "This could change everything, Jalen," she said, her voice a quiet dare, and for a moment he believed it too, the roar of the crowd a balm to the bruises still blooming under his shirt. The precinct's phone lines jammed with complaints, a petition demanding Karen's badge rocketing past 10,000 signatures in hours. Each click a brick in a wall Jalen thought might shield him. He exhaled slow, the tension in his shoulders, easing, a flicker of triumph warming his bones. He'd turned her attack into a weapon, flipped the script with a truth she couldn't outrun. The video was his sword, the protests his army, and as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement, he let himself think he'd won, that this was the crack that would bring her down. "She's done," he said, his words a vow, believing the storm had broken, that justice might finally bare its teeth. But across town, in a cramped apartment off Westheimer Road, Karen Voss seethed, the blinds drawn tight against the midday sun, her buzzed blonde hair damp, with sweat as she paced the worn carpet. The suspension notice sat crumpled on her kitchen counter, a bitter pill she'd choked on since the news hit, her wiry frame buzzing with a fury that wouldn't settle. Her TV blared, Jalen's face plastered across the screen, his calm defiance, mocking her from every angle, the anchor's voice droning excessive force like a knife in her ribs. She slammed her fist into the wall, drywall cracking under her knuckles, a sharp sting blooming in her hand as her breath came ragged. "Thinks he's smart," she muttered, her hazel eyes glinting with venom. A predator cornered but far from beaten. She wasn't done, not by a long shot, her mind already spinning a web to snare him tighter. She grabbed her phone, her fingers trembling with rage as she dialed a number she hadn't touched in months, the line ringing twice before a gruff voice answered. Captain Roy Decker, her ex-partner, a burly man with a crooked grin and a reputation for bending rules until they snapped, picked up from his precinct office, the hum of radios faint in the background. "Vic, it's me," she said, her voice low, urgent, a blade wrapped in silk. "That Carter punk's trying to bury me. I need a favor." Roy's gravelly laugh crackled through the line, a sound like rocks tumbling down a cliff. "What's in it for me?" he asked, leaning back in his chair, his beefy frame creaking the leather. Karen smirked, her lips curling sharp. "A clean slate on that IA mess last year, the one I buried for you." He paused, his breath heavy, then growled, "Deal. What's the play?" She sank onto her couch, the springs groaning under her, her mind racing with the next step. "Plant something," "Big," she said, her tone icy, final. "Make it stick this time." That night, under a moonless sky, Roy slipped out of the precinct, his boots silent on the pavement as he approached Jalen's pickup, still parked crooked outside his home. He'd scouted it earlier, knew Nia was at the hospital pulling a late shift, knew Jalen was inside, probably sleeping off his so-called victory. He carried a stolen glove wiped clean of prints, a relic from an evidence locker he'd misplaced months ago, and a plan that would twist Jalen's hope into a noose. Karen watched from her apartment, her fingers drumming the armrest, her pulse steady as she pictured the fallout. Jalen thought he'd won with his little video stunt, thought the crowd's cheers would carry him free. But she was about to flip the board. The game was hers again, and the next move would hit harder than he could ever brace for, a shadow creeping closer with claws sharpened by spite. What do you think of Karen's dirty counterattack? Comment number 1 if you believe Jalen's viral win deserves to stand against her lies. Smash that like button if you're rooting for his fight, and subscribe because tomorrow's twist will shake this story to its core. Share if you're raging for justice. So what's Roy planting in that truck, and how will it shatter Jalen's fragile triumph? Stick around to find out. The storm's just brewing. 2 days after the viral video lit Houston ablaze, the city's humid grip tightened around the Third Ward, the night air thick with the scent of asphalt and exhaust. Jalen Carter lay on his couch, the box fan whirring a futile battle against the heat, his bruised ribs throbbing under a thin grey tank top. The protest still echoed in his ears, 300 voices chanting his name, a lifeline he'd clung to since Officer Karen Voss's suspension hit the news. His phone buzzed with updates, the petition climbing past 12,000 signatures, each one a brick in a wall he thought might hold. Nia had crashed at the hospital, pulling an extra shift to cover rent, leaving the house quiet, the yellow paint outside peeling under a moonless sky. Jalen's steady gaze drifted to the pickup, parked crooked by the curb, its rusty blue frame a silent witness to Karen's lies. He let his eyes close, a rare calm settling over his broad shoulders, believing the storm might finally break, that the truth had teeth sharp enough to bite back. Across town, Captain Roy Decker moved like a shadow, his burly frame hunched in the precinct parking lot, a stolen glove slipping over his meaty hand. The glove, wiped clean of prints, was a ghost from an evidence locker he'd raided months ago, a favor for a buddy that now served a darker purpose. In his other hand, he gripped a Glock, its black steel scratched but lethal, lifted from a drug bust he'd buried under paperwork. Karen's call had been a spark, her venomous make-it-stick a command he couldn't refuse, not with her holding his internal affairs dirt like a loaded gun. He'd scouted Jalen's street earlier, clocked Nia's absence, and now slipped through the night, his boots muffled on the gravel as he approached the pickup. The Third Ward slept uneasy, dogs barking faint in the distance, but no eyes caught the glint of his badge under the streetlight. He popped the truck's tailgate with a practiced flick, the hinges creaking soft, and tucked the Glock beneath the spare tire, its weight settling like a bomb waiting to blow. He shut it with a muted thud, his crooked grin flashing in the dark, then melted back to his unmarked sedan, dialing an anonymous tip line. "Check Jalen Carter's truck, blue pickup on MLK Boulevard," he growled into a burner phone, voice disguised with a rasp. "He's armed. Dangerous." The line clicked dead, and he drove off, the night swallowing him whole, dawn cracked grey and heavy, the sky bruising purple as Jalen jolted awake to a thunderclap of fists on his front door. The clock blinked 5:30, the air still thick with yesterday's heat, and his heart slammed against his ribs as shouts pierced the quiet. "Houston PD, open up!" a voice bellowed, raw and urgent, boots scuffing the porch. He stumbled to his feet, bare soles slapping the hardwood, his tank top clinging to his sweat-slicked chest as he yanked the door wide. 6 officers spilled in, their black vests glinting under the porch light, guns drawn, barrels glinting cold in the dimness. "Hands up, Carter!" a burly cop with a shaved head roared, his pistol trained on Jalen's chest, finger twitching near the trigger. Jalen froze, palms rising slow, confusion clouding his steady gaze as the room spun. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice tight but firm. a thread of steel holding it steady even as his pulse raced. Nia's scream cut through the chaos, her sneakers pounding the floor as she burst in from the back door, her scrubs smeared with hospital grime, her braids swinging wild. She'd just clocked out, driven home in the pre-dawn hush, only to find her world imploding. "Get back!" A wiry female officer snapped, shoving Nia against the wall, her shoulder slamming into a framed photo of their wedding day, the glass shattering into a jagged rain on the floor. Nia's cry was raw, guttural, her fierce eyes darting to Jalen. As the cops swarmed, their boots trampling the rug, overturning the coffee table with a crash that sent his phone skittering. "Leave her alone," Jalen barked, his voice slicing through the din, his broad frame tensing as he stepped forward, hands still high. The shaved-head cop lunged, grabbing his arm and twisting it hard, slamming him chest first into the wall, the plaster cracking under the impact. "Stay still, punk," he growled, his breath hot with tobacco stink, cuffs snapping shut with a metallic bite that ground into Jalen's already raw wrists. Outside, the pickup loomed under the first streaks of sunrise, its rusty blue paint glowing faintly as two officers circled it, flashlights stabbing the gloom. The tailgate creaked open, and the wiry cop yanked the spare tire aside, her gloved hand pulling out the Glock, its barrel catching the light like a predator's fang. "Weapon confirmed," she shouted, holding it aloft, her voice ringing over the waking street. A triumphant bellow that drew nods from her crew, their faces set in practiced scowls. Jalen's stomach dropped, a cold fist twisting his gut as he craned his neck from the wall, the cuffs cutting deeper. "That's not mine," he said, his tone steady but tight, ringing with a truth they didn't care to hear. The shaved-head cop smirked, his meaty hand shoving Jalen's shoulder harder into the plaster, the impact jarring his bruised ribs until pain flared white-hot. "Shut it, Carter," he snapped, dragging him toward the door. "We got a tip." "That's all we need." Nia lunged forward, her braids whipping as she clawed at the air, her voice breaking. "You can't do this," she yelled, her fierce eyes flooding with tears as the female officer twisted her arm back, pinning her to the splintered frame, her gasp sharp as a blade. "He's innocent," she choked, her knees buckling, but the cops didn't flinch, their boots crunching glass as they hauled Jalen outside. The street woke slow, neighbors peering from behind curtains, some in robes, others clutching mugs, their whispers floating like poison. Knew he was trouble. Always figured he'd snap. Phones glinted, recording the chaos, a silent jury turning against him with every frame. Half a block away, Karen Voss leaned against her unmarked cruiser, her wiry blonde frame cloaked in shadow, her hazel eyes glinting with a smug twist of her lips. She'd slipped out early, watched Roy's plan unfold, and now savored the sight of Jalen's viral win crumbling to ash, his wrists bleeding under the steel as they shoved him into a squad car, the door slamming with a hollow thud. The precinct loomed 6 miles north, a squat brick fortress buzzing with early shift noise, the air thick with cigarette smoke and the drone of radios. Jalen sat in the booking room, his tank top swapped for a scratchy orange jumpsuit, his broad shoulders hunched as ink smudged his fingertips onto a card. The shaved-head cop scribbled a report, illegal possession of a firearm, the words, a noose tightening with every stroke, the Glock's scratched steel now Exhibit A in a case that looked airtight. Jalen stood tall through it, his steady gaze locked on the wall, refusing to bend even as the weight pressed harder. "I didn't put that there," he said, his voice low, a rock against the tide. But the desk sergeant, a doughy man with a bored yawn, just shrugged, sliding the file into a stack. "Tell it to the judge," he muttered, turning away as Jalen's cuffs clinked, the sound echoing off the tile. Simone Grant stormed in an hour later, her sharp heels clicking a war drum. On the precinct floor, her tailored blazer cutting through the chaos like a blade. At 52, she was a lawyer with a tongue that could slice steel and eyes that missed nothing, her dark skin glowing under the fluorescent glare as she slapped a stack of papers on the counter. "This is a setup," she snapped at the sergeant, her voice thunder rolling through the room. "No warrant, no prints, just a tip. You're holding my client on air." The sergeant shrank, his doughy frame wilting under her stare, but he waved her off. "Evidence says otherwise, counselor," he said, nodding to the Glock's photo pinned to the file. Simone's lips curled, a predator's grin flashing as she leaned close. "I'll bury this in court," she vowed, her words a promise carved in stone, then turned to Jalen, her gaze softening. "We'll fight, you hear me?" He nodded, his chest loosening, a faint spark of hope flickering as he clung to her fire, believing the truth might still claw its way out. Back in her cruiser, Karen smirked, her fingers drumming the wheel. Her suspension a slap she'd shrugged off with Roy's pull. The raid had torched Jalen's momentum, turned his home into a crime scene, his name into mud. She pictured him in that cell, the orange jumpsuit swallowing his pride, and let a cold laugh slip past her lips. He thought his video had won, thought the crowd's cheers would shield him, but she'd flipped the game. The Glock was her ace, Roy's muscle her hammer, and as the sun climbed higher, baking the precinct lot, she knew the next blow would land even harder. Jalen's hope was a thread she'd snip, a spark she'd drown, and this was just the start of the reckoning she'd unleash. The humid Houston Saturday draped downtown in a sticky shroud, the sun blazing high over Freedom Park, as Jalen Carter stood on a makeshift stage of plywood and crates, his gray tank top clinging to his sweat-soaked chest. It was 4 days since the raid had torched his home. 3 since the Glock planted in his pickup had chained him to a new lie, and now at noon the air buzzed with the chants of 300 souls, their raised fists punching holes in the thick heat. Simone Grant, his lawyer, had rallied them here, her sharp voice crackling through a megaphone earlier, calling for justice after the precinct spat him out on a flimsy bail. Jalen's wrists still bore the cuff's red scars, his ribs aching, where the shaved-head cop had slammed him into the wall, but his steady gaze swept the crowd, a quiet fire burning in his brown eyes. The orange jumpsuit was gone, swapped for jeans and the tank top, his broad shoulders squared against the weight of a city turning against him. Nia stood at his side, her nurse's scrubs swapped for a white tee, her braided hair glinting in the sunlight, her fierce eyes scanning the sea of signs. "Free Jalen, end the lies." Simone handed him the mic, her tailored blazer crisp despite the 90-degree swelter, her nod a silent command to speak. Jalen gripped the stand, his calloused hands steady, the crowd hushing as his voice rolled out, raw and jagged with truth. "I'm no criminal," he said, the words rising over the murmurs, cutting through the humid stillness like a blade. "They stopped me, beat me, framed me with a gun that ain't mine, but I'm still standing here because of you." The crowd roared, a wave of sound crashing against the concrete, fists pumping, phones flashing as they recorded every syllable. His tank top clung tighter, sweat beading on his close-cropped hair, but he pressed on, his tone sharpening. "They think they can bury me, silence us, but we're louder than their lies." Cheers erupted, a woman in a red cap shouting, "Preach it!" her voice swallowed by the swell of defiance. Jalen's chest surged, hope flaring bright as he felt the energy coil around him, a lifeline after days of suffocation. "We demand accountability," he roared, his voice cracking with emotion. "Not just for me, but for every soul they've crushed because of the color of our skin." The crowd swelled, clapping, stomping, their rhythm shaking the cracked pavement, a tide of fury and faith that lifted Jalen's spirit. Nia squeezed his hand, her fingers warm, her whisper brushing his ear. "You're reaching them." He nodded, a rare spark lighting his steady gaze, believing this was the turning point, the moment Houston might finally listen. 300 voices chanted, "Jalen, Jalen," a pulse that thrummed through the park's wilted grass, drowning out the distant hum of traffic. Simone watched from the sidelines, her arms crossed, a tight smile tugging at her lips as she adjusted, her glasses, her sharp mind already plotting the next legal strike. For the first time since Karen's stop, Jalen dared to nurture a fragile flame, picturing the precinct crumbling under this weight, the petitions soaring past 15,000, the news vans circling like vultures now forced to eat their own lies. "Together we'll break these chains," he shouted, raising his fist, and the roar peaked, a deafening crescendo that shook the air, phones spiking the live stream to 10,000 viewers in minutes. But across the park, hidden behind a row of warped oaks, Captain Roy Decker sat in an unmarked black SUV, his beefy frame spilling over the driver's seat, his graying mustache twitching with disdain. Beside him, Karen Voss leaned forward, her wiry blonde hair slick with perspiration, her hazel eyes narrowing as Jalen's voice boomed through the trees. Her suspension had been a slap, Roy's influence wiping it clean in a day, and now they stewed, watching him rise like a phoenix from the ashes they'd piled on him. "He's getting too loud," Karen muttered, cracking her knuckles, her voice a low hiss of fury. Roy grunted, his meaty hand tapping the wheel, his crooked grin flashing. "Let him crow," he said, his tone gravelly, smug. "Makes the fall harder." He'd already made calls, pulled strings with shadows who owed him, and now nodded to Karen, his eyes glinting dark. "Time to shut this down." She smirked, her lips curling sharp as she dialed a burner phone, her voice dropping, low urgent. "Leon, it's go time. Make it messy." 2 blocks away, Leon crouched in a vacant lot, a wiry thug with a shaved head and a jagged scar snaking down his neck, his black jacket heavy with the weight of a loaded 9mm. Roy had hired him last night, slipped him 500 bucks in a gas station lot, whispering, "Chaos not kills," over the rumble of engines. Leon grinned crooked, his teeth flashing as he slipped the gun from his waistband, the steel cool against his palm. He moved into position, boots silent on the cracked asphalt, blending into the crowd's edge where the chants faded into murmurs. Back at the rally, Jalen hit his stride, his words ringing clear. "We'll fight until the truth stands tall." The crowd erupted again, a sea of fists and flashing screens, Nia's eyes shining as she gripped his arm, whispering, "They're with us." He raised his fist higher, the roar swelling, a moment of pure defiance he thought might carry him. Free, the city's pulse beating in sync with his own. Then it happened. 3 sharp cracks split the air, gunshots echoing off the downtown towers, not from the stage but from the park's fringe where Leon stood, his barrel pointed skyward. The bullets punched holes in the clouds, a signal to chaos, and panic erupted, the crowd scattering like spilled water, screams piercing the heat as bodies shoved and stumbled. Jalen dropped the mic, its feedback squealing as he grabbed Nia, pulling her behind the stage, his heart slamming against his ribs. "Stay low," he yelled, his voice lost in the din, his broad frame shielding her as they hit the dirt, dust choking his lungs. Signs crumpled underfoot, a child's wail cutting through the mayhem as a man tripped, his ankle twisting at a sickening angle, blood seeping from a gash where he'd fallen on broken glass. 30 injured in seconds, a teenage girl clutching, a shattered elbow, an old man dazed with a crimson trickle staining his white shirt. 2 others motionless, their bodies limp in the wreckage, blood pooling dark on the pavement. Sirens wailed in the distance, closing fast as the dust settled, revealing a toll that turned Jalen's stomach. 2 dead, 30 wounded, the park a battlefield of twisted limbs and abandoned hope. Leon melted into the chaos, his scar vanishing in the fleeing crowd. His job done as Roy's payment burned a hole in his pocket. Karen smirked from the SUV, her wiry frame buzzing with glee, muttering "perfect," while Roy chuckled, his meaty, hand slapping the dash. "Blame's on him now." Police swarmed the scene, batons out, their shouts overlapping as they zeroed in on Jalen, still crouched with Nia, his tank top torn, his face streaked with sweat and grime. "Holloway!" A stocky cop with a crew cut bellowed, storming over, his boots crunching debris. "You're under arrest, inciting a riot." Jalen blinked, disbelief crashing over him, his voice rising sharp. "I was speaking, not shooting." But the cop grabbed his arm, twisting it back, cuffs snapping on with a bite that drew blood, Nia's cry ringing out as she lunged. "He didn't do this," she screamed, but a second officer shoved her back, her shoulder slamming the stage's edge, her gasp swallowed by the chaos. The crowd fractured, fleeing or weeping, some muttering, "He brought this," their faith shattered by the blood staining the grass. Karen stepped from the SUV, her boots grinding the earth, her smirk widening as Jalen was hauled to a cruiser, his wrists bleeding under the steel. She'd turned his triumph into a trap, the rally's hope into a massacre, and Houston would eat it up, the news already spinning, "Carter rally turns deadly." Jalen sat in the cruiser, his breath ragged, his mind reeling. He'd begged for peace, built a wave of support, but this was a nightmare he couldn't outrun. The city's cheers twisting into boos, 2 lives gone, 30 broken, all pinned on him. Simone raced over, her blazer flapping, shouting, "This is insanity." But the cuffs held, the cop's smirk a mirror of Karen's as they peeled out, leaving Naya crumpled in the dust, her sobs a faint echo in the wreckage. What's your take on this brutal twist? Comment number 1 if you think Jalen's voice should have been his shield, not his noose. Hit like if you're stunned by Karen's ruthless play, and subscribe because tomorrow's chapter will flip this saga upside down. Share if you're screaming for justice. So how far will Roy and Karen push this carnage, and can Jalen claw back from a city that's turned its back? The fire's just starting. Stay tuned. Night fell heavy over Houston's 3rd Ward, a thick blanket of humidity pressing down on Jalen Carter's neighborhood as he slumped on the couch, the box fan rattling a futile protest against the 90-degree heat. It was hours after the fight. Rally had bled into a riot. The park's carnage, 2 dead, 30 injured, still flashing in his skull, the cuffs bite fresh on his wrists from the arrest that pinned it all on him. Simone Grant had bailed him out by dusk, her sharp heels storming the precinct with a wad of cash from a frantic Nia, who'd scraped it from their thinning savings. Jalen's grey tank top hung loose now, stained with park dirt and sweat, his broad shoulders sagging under a weight that wouldn't lift. His close-cropped hair glistened, his steady gaze dulled as he stared at the plywood Nia had nailed over the front window, a temporary shield against a world turning hostile. The pickup sat outside, its rusty blue frame a ghost in the streetlight, and he let his mind drift, clinging to the faint hope that the community's outrage might still roar loud enough to drown out the lies. Across town, Captain Roy Decker hunched in his unmarked sedan, his beefy frame spilling over the seat, his graying mustache twitching as he flipped through a stack of flyers fresh from a precinct printer. "Jalen Carter, killer on the loose," the bold text screamed, his mugshot plastered beside lies of armed and dangerous and rally butcher. He'd churned them out that afternoon, a venomous seed Karen Voss had watered with her hissed. Make them hate him over the phone. Roy smirked, his crooked grin flashing as he drove to a biker bar off Telephone Road, a dive thick with exhaust and stale beer. Inside he slipped the flyers to a hulking man named Duke, his beard braided, tight swastika ink snaking up his scarred arms. "Spread these," Roy muttered, sliding a wad of 20s across the sticky table. "Carter's a plague, needs stomping." Duke grinned, pocketing the cash, his fists curling like hammers as he nodded. "We'll handle it," he rasped, his voice a gravel pit, and Roy slipped out knowing the spark was lit. By 10 the flyers had spread like a virus, taped to poles, stuffed in mailboxes, littering the 3rd Ward's cracked sidewalks. Neighbors whispered over fences, some clutching the paper with trembling hands, others nodding slow, "Told you he's trouble." The air buzzed with a dark current, phones pinging with texts. "Carter's a murderer, get him out." Jalen sat oblivious, his bruised ribs pulsing as he sipped water from a chipped mug. Naya pacing the kitchen, her braids swinging with every step. She'd come home from the hospital an hour ago, her white tee swapped for a nightshirt, her fierce eyes red-rimmed from crying over the rally's dead. "They can't keep doing this," she said, her voice breaking, hands wringing a dish towel. Jalen nodded, his tone low, steady. "Simone's got the footage, the chance. People saw me speak, not shoot." He believed it, felt the crowd's echo in his bones, thought the truth might still claw through the blood and ash. Then the roar hit. Engines growled in the distance, growing louder, closer, until 6 bikes tore around the corner, their headlights slashing the night like knives. Duke led the pack, his wild eyes glinting under a battered helmet, the flyer's lies fueling his blood as he spotted Jalen's pickup. "There's the bastard!" he bellowed, his voice a feral howl, tires screeching as a dozen more men spilled. From a pickup truck behind, pipes and bats gleaming in their fists. Jalen jolted upright, the mug crashing to the floor, water pooling as he rushed to the window, peeling back the plywood's edge. His heart slammed against his ribs, his steady gaze narrowing at the mob closing in, their shouts a twisted chorus. "Killer! Get him!" Nia froze, her breath hitching, her nightshirt fluttering as she grabbed his arm. "What's happening?" she gasped, but the answer came fast. A Molotov cocktail sailed through the air, shattering against the pickup's hood, flames erupting in a whoosh that lit the street orange. Jalen yanked Nia back, his broad frame shielding her as glass exploded, the truck's cab igniting, fire licking the sky in greedy tongues. "Out the back!" he barked, shoving her toward the kitchen, his sneakers skidding on the hardwood as the mob's boots thundered closer. Duke swung a bat, smashing the pickup's windshield, shards raining like jagged teeth, his grin wild as the flames danced. "Burn him out!" he roared, and the gang surged, pipes clanging against the porch railing, splintering wood with every strike. Jalen bolted, dragging Nia through the back door, her sobs choking the air as they hit the alley, the night sour, with trash and smoke. He pushed her ahead, his ribs screaming, glancing back as the mob breached the porch, a pipe shattering the front door's glass, their shouts a feral hymn. "End him!" The alley twisted tight, walls looming as Jalen sprinted, his tank top ripping at the seam, Nia's bare feet slapping the pavement, her nightshirt snagging on a dumpster's edge. The mob followed, boots pounding, a bat grazing his shoulder. As he ducked, pain exploding in a white-hot burst, blood soaking his sleeve in seconds. He stumbled, fell, rolled, the asphalt biting his knees, his vision swimming as Duke loomed, bat raised high. "Coward!" Duke spat, swinging again, the steel grazing Jalen's scalp, stars bursting as blood trickled warm down his temple. Jalen kicked out, his heel catching Duke's shin, bone crunching as the biker howled, buying seconds. He scrambled behind the Kaitu dumpster, his breath ragged, dragging Nia down with him, her hands trembling as she clutched his arm, her whisper a plea. "They're gonna kill us." The mob beat the dumpster, metal groaning under pipes and fists, their shouts a storm. "Come out, you filth!" Jalen's body screamed, blood crusting his lip, his shoulder throbbing where the bat had landed, but his mind raced, plotting escape. Sirens wailed faint, growing louder, a neighbor's call piercing the chaos as lights flared 2 blocks away. The mob froze, Duke spitting curses as the bikes revved, scattering into the night, their tailpipes roaring retreat. Jalen slumped, his chest heaving, Nia sobbing as she tore her nightshirt, bandaging his shoulder with shaking hands, crimson soaking the fabric fast. "You're alive," she choked, her fierce eyes flooding, pulling him close as the pickup's flames crackled. A charred husk collapsing in the street, its skeleton glowing against the dark. Cops rolled in minutes later, their boots crunching. Glass as they surveyed the wreckage, the truck a smoldering ruin, the porch a splintered mess. Jalen stood, blood dripping down his arm, Nia clinging to him as Simone screeched up in her sedan, her blazer flapping as she leapt out. "This is madness," she shouted, her sharp voice slicing through the humid air, heels clicking as she stormed to Jalen. "They tried to kill him!" The lead cop, a wiry man with a scarred cheek, shrugged, cuffing Jalen despite the blood, his tone flat. Public disturbance inciting this mess. Jalen's jaw tightened, disbelief crashing over him. "I was attacked," he rasped, but... The judge revoked bail by phone an hour later, swayed by a quick call from Roy. "Carter's too dangerous, look at this chaos." Simone fought, her voice a roar, but the cuffs held, dragging Jalen back to the precinct, his orange jumpsuit swapped on again, the cell's damp air seeping into his wounds. Karen and Roy toasted in a dive bar off Main Street that night, her wiry frame buzzing with glee, his beefy hand clinking a whiskey glass against her beer. The TV flickered, news spinning, Carter linked to mob violence, truck torch to the Flyers' lies now gospel. "He's finished," Roy growled, his crooked grin wide, savoring the sight of Jalen's bloodied face on screen. Karen nodded, her hazel eyes glinting sharp. "Told you I'd bury him," she said, her laugh a bitter edge, knowing the city saw a monster now, not a man. Jalen sat in his cell, the cot creaking under his bruised frame, Nia's sobs echoing in his skull. As he replayed the mob's pipes, the fire's roar. He'd thought the rally's outrage would lift him, that the community's voice might shield his family, but this was a gut punch he hadn't braced for. The truck was ash, his body battered, his name filth, and as the precinct's bulb flickered, overhead he felt the noose tighten, believing it was over. Unaware of the next blow Roy was already sharpening, a blade poised to cut deeper still. The next day dawned grey and oppressive over Houston's 3rd Ward, a muggy haze clinging to the streets as Jalen Carter sat shackled in a precinct cell, the damp concrete walls seeping into his bones. The mob's attack still throbbed in his battered frame. His shoulder a swollen mess where Duke's bat had landed, blood crusted on his scalp from the graze, his ribs pulsing with every shallow breath. The orange jumpsuit chafed his skin, a coarse reminder of the rally's bloody fallout and the truck's charred husk, now towed to a scrapyard, its ashes a symbol of his shredded hope. Nia's sobs from last night echoed in his skull, her fierce, eyes red-rimmed as she'd watched the cops drag him back to this cage, her voice breaking through the precinct glass. "I'll get you out." He clung to that, his steady gaze fixed on the flickering bulb overhead, believing Simone Grant's legal fire might still burn through the lies, that the community's outrage could lift him from this pit. But the air hung heavy, a storm brewing. Beyond the bars he couldn't see. 5 miles away, Nia stood in the sterile break room of Mercy Hospital, her nurse's scrubs crisp despite the sleepless night, her braided hair pulled tight in a bun that gleamed under the fluorescent glow. At 33, she was a pillar of grit, her slender hands steady as she poured coffee into a styrofoam cup, the bitter scent grounding her as she replayed the mob's pipes, the fire's roar. Her shift started at 7, a lifeline to keep. Rent paid now that Jalen's garage sat silent, his tools idle since the raid. She'd patched his shoulder in the alley, her fingers trembling as blood soaked her torn nightshirt, and now leaned against the counter, her fierce eyes tracing the linoleum, willing herself to hold it together. "He's strong," she muttered, a vow to herself, believing his voice at the rally, 300 fists pumping, might still echo loud enough to free him. The hospital buzzed around her, patients coughing in the halls, but her world shrank to the phone in her pocket, waiting for Simone's call, a spark of hope in the dark. Across town, Karen Voss sat in her cramped apartment off Westheimer Road, the blinds slanted shut, a rattling fan stirring the stale air as she hunched over her laptop, her wiry blonde hair damp with sweat. Her hazel eyes glinted with spite, her suspension a bitter memory Roy Decker had erased with a phone call, but Jalen's rally defiance and the mob's failure to finish him gnawed at her like a splinter. The TV flickered, news spinning, Carter's "Chaos escalates," the truckfirer headline she'd fed them through Roy's flyers. But it wasn't enough. She scrolled a hate forum on the dark web, her rusty hacking skills sharp enough to crack its shadows, her gloved fingers swift as she typed a post. "Nia Carter, wife of felon Jalen Carter, works at Mercy Hospital 5 miles from their dump on MLK, harboring a killer. Shut it down." She hit enter, her smirk curling sharp, knowing trolls and bots would amplify it, a digital wildfire she'd light to torch their lives. By 8, the post spread, racist screeds blooming like weeds across platforms, hashtags, like Fire Nia and Thug Family trending as venom poured in. "She's as bad as him, boycott Mercy or burn it down." The hospital's switchboard lit up, calls flooding from blocked numbers, voices hissing threats. "We'll torch your kids. You're dead if you stay." Nia clocked in, oblivious, her hands steady as she checked a patient's chart, her smile faint but warm for a toddler with a fever. The charge nurse, Clara, a nervous woman with grey curls and a trembling lip, caught the first call at 9, her face paling as a man snarled, "Fire that black bitch or we'll bomb this place." She hung up, her breath shallow, then took another. A woman shrieking, "Your patients ain't safe with her." By 10, the threats piled up, a dozen in 30 minutes, the hospital's lobby buzzing with staff whispers, eyes darting to Nia as she moved through the halls, her scrubs a quiet defiance, against the storm she didn't yet feel. Clara called Nia to the office at 11, the room tight with the scent of antiseptic and fear, her grey curls quivering as she clutched the desk. "Nia," she said, her voice shaking, "we've got calls, threats, saying you're dangerous, tied to Jalen's mess." Nia froze, her coffee cup slipping from her hand, crashing onto the tile in a brown shatter, her fierce eyes narrowing. "What?" she rasped, her chest tightening as Clara stammered. "They're threatening to shut us down, hurt people." "I can't keep you, not with this." Nia's breath caught, a cold fist twisting her gut as she stepped back, her sneakers squeaking on the shards. "This is my job," she said, her voice rising sharp with disbelief. "He's innocent. I'm innocent." Clara's eyes welled, her hands wringing. I know, but we're closing today, locking up. I'm sorry. Nia stood rigid, her braids swaying as she turned, storming out, the hospital's hum fading behind her as she stumbled to the parking lot, her world crumbling under a lie she couldn't fight. She drove home in a daze, the sedan's engine rumbling low, her fierce eyes flooding as she gripped the wheel, tears streaking her cheeks. Their savings were a thread, snapped now with her job gone, the activist funds from the rally barely a bandage on a gaping wound. She pulled into the driveway at noon, the truck's absence a raw scar, the plywood window a grim sentinel over their battered home. She stepped inside, the air thick with last night's smoke, and sank to the kitchen floor, her scrubs crumpling, as sobs tore through her, the weight of it crushing her slender frame. The hospital had been her rock, her pride, and now it was ash, burned by shadows she couldn't name. She clutched her phone, dialing Jalen's cell, now with Simone, her voice breaking as she left a message. They fired me, Jalen. They're after us both. The line cut, her cry echoing off the cabinets, believing he'd find a way, that a lawsuit might strike back. That night at 8, a brick crashed through the kitchen window, glass exploding in a jagged rain that sliced Nia's arm, blood welling fast as she screamed, diving to the floor. The brick thudded beside her, a racial slur scrawled in red paint dripping like venom. Nigger bitch. Her breath hitched, her nightshirt soaking crimson as she crawled to the counter, glass crunching under her palms, her fierce eyes wild with terror. Outside, tires squealed, a shadow vanishing into the dark. Karen's unseen army landing another blow. Neighbors peeked from blinds, some gasping, others nodding slow. Told you, they're cursed. Their whispers a chorus of betrayal. Jalen felt it miles away, a jolt in his cell as his phone buzzed with Nia's call to Simone, relayed through a guard. Brick hit her, she's bleeding. His rage boiled, fists clenching against the steel, his voice a growl. They've gone too far. He called Simone from the precinct line, his tone low, urgent, the static crackling as he spoke. They're hitting Nia now. A brick, threats. Her job's gone, he said, his steady gaze burning through the bars. Simone's response was sharp, a whip crack over the phone. Document it, every shard, every drop of blood, we'll use it, she vowed, her voice iron, but a warning lingered in her tone, the case slipping as the jury's eyes grew cold in her mind. Jalen nodded, his chest heaving, boarding up the window in his thoughts as he pictured Nia sweeping glass, her hands trembling, her blood a scar he couldn't erase. He'd thought the rally was rock bottom, that the community's cash was a shield, but Karen and Roy had turned his home into a war zone, Nia into collateral damage, their lives a battlefield he couldn't defend. Roy met Karen at a gas station lot that evening, the air thick with exhaust, his SUV idling as she leaned against her cruiser, her wiry frame buzzing with triumph. Daycare's toast, she said, her smirk sharp, meaning Mercy's closure, Nia's ruin. Next we crush his spirit. Roy chuckled, his beefy hand slapping the wheel, his graying mustache twitching. He's got nowhere to run. Keep squeezing. They'd turned Jalen's hope to dust, the brick a warning shot, the job loss a gut punch, and they weren't done. Jalen stood on his porch in his mind, the slurs red paint a wound on his soul, believing he'd protect Nia, but the enemy was inside his walls now, the fight uglier, deadlier than ever. Can you feel Nia's world shattering under this racist storm? Comment number 1 if you think she deserves to stand tall despite their venom, hit like if Karen's cruelty has you boiling, and subscribe because tomorrow's twist will rip this tale wide open. Share if you're aching for their fight. What's Roy cooking up next to break Jalen's spirit, and can Simone's fire burn through this darkness? The battle's heating up. Don't miss what's coming. Midnight draped Houston in a sticky shroud, the air thick with the tang of rust and damp earth, as Jalen Carter sat shackled in his precinct cell, the concrete walls slick with mildew, his orange jumpsuit chafing his bruised skin. The mob's attack lingered in his bones, his shoulder swollen purple, blood crusted on his scalp, ribs aching with every breath, compounded by Nia's shattered world, her job torched by Karen Voss's hate forum post, her arms sliced by that brick's jagged flight. He'd called Simone Grant from the precinct line hours ago, his voice a low growl through the static, relaying Nia's bleeding desperation, and clung to her vow. "We'll use it." His steady gaze pierced the dark, the flickering bulb overhead, casting shadows on his broad frame, believing her legal fire might still burn a path out. But the cell's damp chill seeped deeper, a quiet dread gnawing at his hope as the night stretched thin. 5 miles away, Nia swept glass from the kitchen floor, her nightshirt stained with dried blood, her fierce eyes red-rimmed as she moved, slow, her bandaged arm throbbing under the gauze she'd wrapped herself. The brick slur, "nigger bitch," lay heavy on the counter, its red paint a scar she couldn't scrub away, the shattered window now a plywood patch Jalen couldn't fix from his cage. She'd cried herself dry, her slender frame trembling. As she dialed Simone again, leaving a shaky voicemail, "He needs this, we need this." The hospital's closure had gutted their savings, the activist funds from the rally a dwindling flicker, and now she knelt, gathering shards, believing Jalen's fight might still stand tall, that a lawsuit could strike back at the shadows clawing, their lives apart. Across the city, a rusted warehouse loomed on Howell Mill Road, its broken windows gaping like empty sockets, the air sour with dust and metal as Jalen slipped inside, his sneakers silent on the cracked concrete. Simone had pulled strings, a sympathetic judge granting a midnight release on a technicality, expired warrant from the rally arrest, giving him hours before the precinct could refile. His grey tank top hung loose, torn from the mob, bloodstains, fading to rust as he met Tyrell Jones, a rookie cop barely 25, his uniform crisp, his dark eyes darting nervous in the gloom. "For you, Carter," Tyrell whispered, his lanky frame shifting as he pulled a recorder from his pocket, hands trembling. Jalen nodded, his broad shoulders tense, heart pounding as Tyrell pressed play. Captain Roy Decker's gravelly voice crackled. "Thruce, Carter's toast. That gun was gold. Rally Chaos was a masterpiece." Karen's laugh followed, sharp and venomous. "He's ours now." Jalen's breath caught, fists clenching tight, nails digging into his palms as the truth hit, a raw proof to blow their lies wide open. "Why risk this?" Jalen asked, his voice low, steady, studying Tyrell's earnest face, sweat beading on the rookie's brow. "Joined the force to help, not hurt," Tyrell said, his tone shaky but firm. "They're dirty, man. I can't stomach it." Jalen's steady gaze locked on him, weighing the tremble in his hands, the flicker in his eyes, and decided to trust, a spark igniting in his chest. "Get this to my lawyer, Simone Grant," he said, his words a command wrapped in hope. "We'll bury them." Tyrell nodded, slipping the recorder back into his pocket, his lanky frame straightening. "Tomorrow, precinct lot noon," he promised, and they parted, Jalen's heart thudding with a rare thrill, his sneakers echoing soft as he slipped back to the night, believing he had them, that this tape was the knockout blow to end the nightmare. Morning. Broke muggy and grey, the third ward simmering under a haze as Jalen paced the kitchen, Nia brewing coffee, its bitter edge grounding them as he replayed Tyrell's words. "If this holds," he told her, his voice rising, alive. "We're back in the fight, Karen's toast." Nia managed to smile, fragile but real, her bandaged arm brushing his as she handed him a mug. "Maybe we'll get our life back," she said, her fierce eyes softening. And he clung to that, picturing the courtroom, the jury's gasp, Karen's fall. He'd slipped home under dawn's cover, the precinct none the wiser, and now stood in jeans and a fresh tea. The bloodstains gone, hope threading through his battered frame. At noon he met Tyrell in the precinct lot, the sun glaring off windshields, the recorder handed over in a quick handshake, its plastic casing scratched but heavy with truth. "You're doing right," Jalen said, his steady gaze locking on. Tyrell's and the rookie nodded, a faint grin breaking through. "Hope it's enough." Simone took it that afternoon, her office a clutter of files and coffee cups off Main Street, her sharp eyes lighting up as she listened, Roy's gravelly confession crackling through her speakers. "This is dynamite, Jalen," she said, her tailored blazer crisp, her voice thunder rolling over the desk. "We'll play it in court, they're done." He left her office lighter, the weight of weeks lifting, his broad shoulders squared as he walked the humid streets, believing he'd turned the corner, that justice was clawing its way out. The tape was gold, a weapon forged from their own words, and he pictured Nia safe, their home whole, the precinct's walls crumbling under its weight. He thought he'd won, that this was the crack to shatter their empire, the mob's blood and Naya's scars finally avenged. But Karen wasn't blind. She'd clocked Tyrell's jitters at the precinct that morning, his sidelong glances as he shuffled papers, his lanky frame shrinking under her stare. Her gut screamed betrayal, a predator's instinct honed by years of twisting truth. And she tailed him that night, her cruiser a shadow on his beat-up Honda, catching him slip into a corner store off MLK Boulevard. She cornered him in the alley. Behind, her boots crunching gravel, her wiry frame buzzing as she loomed, her voice a hiss cutting the dark. "You're talking, rookie." "Who to?" Tyrell froze, his uniform wrinkling as he backed against the brick, his dark eyes wide. "Nobody," he lied, his voice a rasp, but Karen grabbed his collar, slamming him into the wall, the thud echoing off the dumpster. "Don't play me," she snarled, her hazel eyes glinting venom. "I'll end you." She dug through his pockets, finding a burner phone, no recorder but enough to confirm her hunch, her smirk curling sharp as she let him drop, his knees buckling. Roy got the call minutes later, his beefy frame sprawled in his precinct office, his meaty hand crushing a soda can, the aluminum crumpling as Karen's voice crackled through. "He's flipped," she said, her tone icy. "Fix it." Roy's graying mustache twitched, his crooked grin flashing as he growled, "Oh, I will." He dug into Tyrell's file, a failed drug test from his academy days, buried by a favor now ripe for leverage, and hit him at dawn, banging on his apartment. Door off Ponce de Leon, a cramped box that smelled of stale pizza. Tyrell opened bleary-eyed, his uniform rumpled, blinking at Karen's wiry silhouette. "What the hell?" he rasped. But she shoved the test results in his face, positive for cocaine, her voice a blade. "You're done, kid, unless you flip. Back. Testify Carter bribed you or this goes public, career over, jail time." Tyrell's knees buckled, his lanky frame slumping, his voice a whisper. "I can't," he said, but Karen leaned close, her breath sour with spite. "You will tomorrow, court, or you're a ghost." He nodded, broken, the recorder still with Simone, but his courage snapped like a twig under her heel. The courtroom. Hummed the next day, Harris County simmering under an August sun, as Jalen sat at the defense table, his jumpsuit swapped for a borrowed gray suit, his wrists raw from cuffs, hope flickering as Simone prepped the recorder. "We've got them," she whispered, her sharp eyes glinting, and he believed her, his broad shoulders lifting. The prosecutor, a balding man named Pitts, called Tyrell to the stand, a surprise witness, his uniform wrinkled, his dark eyes hollow as he swore in. "Tell us about Jalen Carter," Pitts said, and Tyrell swallowed, his voice shaky, a threadbare lie spilling out. "He bribed me. $500, said to lie about Voss and Decker, make up some recording. I took it, I'm sorry." The room gasped, Jalen's head snapping up, his voice breaking free. "That's not true," he shouted, but the judge, a wiry man with a hawkish nose, banged his gavel, silencing him. Simone leapt, her objection sharp. "No proof, he's lying." Pitts waved a forged receipt, smirking. "Here's the payment," he said, and the judge nodded. "Overruled, proceed." Tyrell slumped, avoiding Jalen's stare, the jury's faces hardening. A woman with a tight bun scribbling furiously, a man with a buzz cut nodding, knew he was dirty. Jalen sank back, his chest hollow. The recorder useless now, Tyrell's flip a knife in his gut. He'd trusted, thought he'd won, but Karen had outplayed him, her smirk from the gallery cutting deeper than the cuffs ever had. Court adjourned, the buzz deafening as Simone turned, her voice grim. "We're losing them fast, that tape's our last shot." Jalen stared, his steady gaze fracturing, Nia's bandaged arm flashing in his mind, the glimmer of hope snuffed out by a rookie's. Broken spine and Karen's iron grip. The next evening simmered under Houston's bruised dusk sky, the air thick with humidity and the faint tang of gasoline as Jalen Carter stood outside a cramped studio off Washington Avenue, his borrowed gray tee damp with sweat, his broad shoulders tense from the cell's lingering chill. It was a day since Tyrell Jones's courtroom betrayal had torched the recorder's promise, leaving Jalen shackled until Simone Grant's sharp heels stormed a sympathetic judge into a late-night bail, ruling $5,000, scraped from Nia's hospital contacts, arguing he wasn't a flight risk. His wrists bore fresh scars, his shoulder throbbing under a bandage Nia had rewrapped that morning, her fierce eyes red from sleepless nights. The mob's attack, the truck's ashes, Nia's lost job, all piled on his bones, but a faint spark flickered in his chest as Simone booked him on Truth Bomb, a podcast with 80,000 listeners, hosted by a gravel-voiced man named Darius. "You're trending again," Simone had said, her tailored blazer crisp, her sharp eyes fierce. "Use it." The studio was a tight box, wires snaking across the floor. Darius's mic, a battered relic perched on a rickety table, but it's live. Stream hummed with 50,000 ears tuning in. A city on edge waiting to hear Jalen's voice. He sat, his grey tee clinging to his chest, his close-cropped hair glinting under the single bulb, Nia's brother's old jeans stiff on his legs as he leaned into the mic, his steady gaze locking on Darius. "I've been stopped, framed, bombed," he began, his voice raw, rising over the static, cutting through the humid air like a blade. "My wife's been targeted, our home smashed, but I'm not the monster they paint." Darius nodded, his gravelly tone rumbling. "You're saying it's a setup?" Jalen's fists clenched, his tone sharpening. "Every step. That gun wasn't mine. The rally wasn't chaos I made. The mob wasn't my call. That tape Roy Decker burned. It was real. They're the criminals." The chat exploded, comments blazing. "He's spitting facts. Believe him." Views climbed, 60,000, 70,000, donations trickling in, $500, then 1,000, as Jalen's words hit home. His chest surged, hope flaring as the numbers spiked, 80,000 listeners by the broadcast's peak, the live stream spiking to 10,000 concurrent eyes. "They burned my life," he said, his voice cracking with emotion, "but I'm still here, begging for truth." Darius leaned in, his mic creaking. "You're calling out Voss and Decker directly?" Jalen nodded, his steady gaze burning. "They're cops, but they're crooks. I've got nothing left to lose." Donations hit $2,000 support. Surging, comments flooding. "Justice for Jalen! Expose them!" Nia sat beside him, her bandaged arm brushing his, her white tee catching the bulb's glow, her fierce eyes shining as she whispered, "You're untouchable now." He wanted to believe it, felt the tide turning, the city waking up as national outlets picked it up. "Houston man alleges police conspiracy." A Georgia senator tweeting, "Looking into this. DOJ might too." Jalen thought he'd built a shield that Karen and Roy couldn't touch him with the world watching. The cash a lifeline for Simone to push harder. By nightfall, the podcast soared to 200,000 listens. The studio's cramped walls vibrating with the echo of his voice, the donations steady at 2,000, enough for Simone to vow, "We'll force a retrial." Jalen slept that night on their couch, Nia curled beside him, her bandaged arm across his chest, his first real rest in weeks, dreaming of justice, not jail. He pictured the courtroom, the jury's eyes softening, Karen's smirk fading under the weight of a million ears, believing he'd turned their traps into his triumph. But Roy Decker wasn't sleeping. He sat in his precinct office, the blinds shut tight, his beefy frame hunched over a desk littered with fake wanted flyers, Jalen's face plastered with "armed and dangerous" lies he'd printed an hour ago. His graying mustache twitched, his meaty hands flipping through as he dialed Karen, his voice a growl. "He's loud again, time to hunt." Karen took the call in her apartment, her wiry blonde hair damp from a shower, her hazel eyes glinting with malice as she paced the worn carpet, the fan rattling in the corner. "Podcast, huh?" she muttered, her smirk sharp. "Let's give them a show." She'd seen the senator's tweet, felt the heat creeping closer, but thrived on it, her mind spinning a counterstrike. Roy's flyers were the spark, and she'd light the fire. By morning she'd spread them, slipping stacks, to Duke at the biker bar off Telephone Road, the same hulking thug with swastika ink who'd torched Jalen's truck. "Carter's a killer hiding in plain sight," she whispered, her voice a venomous purr sliding cash across the table. Duke grinned, his braided beard swaying as he nodded, pocketing the bills. "We'll get him good," he rasped, and by noon the flyers were everywhere. taped to poles stuffed in mailboxes, a vigilante called "Get him before he gets us." That evening, Jalen stepped out, the air sticky and still, heading to meet Simone with the latest donation totals. His sedan parked 2 blocks away, a precaution after the brick. The street was quiet, too quiet, the Third Ward holding its breath until it shattered. A roar of engines tore through the dusk, 6 bikes ripping around the corner, Duke's wild eyes glinting as he spotted Jalen. "There he is!" he bellowed, tires screeching, the flyer's lies fueling his blood as a dozen more men spilled from a pickup, pipes and bats swinging. But this time duffel bags thudded at their feet, stuffed with homemade bombs Roy had sourced from a shady dealer. "Killer!" They screamed, closing in, their boots a thunderclap on the pavement. Jalen bolted, his sneakers pounding, his heart slamming. "I'm not armed," he yelled, but they didn't care. A bottle smashing at his feet, glass spraying as he ducked into an alley, the walls tight, the air sour with trash. The mob followed. Boots thundering, a pipe swinging, cracking his shoulder where the bat had hit before. Pain exploding as blood soaked his tea in a fresh flood. He stumbled, fell, rolled, asphalt biting his knees, his vision swimming as Duke loomed, a bomb in hand, its fuse sparking. "End him!" Duke roared, tossing it, the blast ripping the alley apart, a fireball clawing the sky, shrapnel raining. As Jalen dove behind a dumpster, the steel buckling under the force. 5 dead instantly, a biker shredded by metal, a woman fleeing too late, her scream cut short, 3 bystanders caught in the chaos, their bodies crumpling in the wreckage. Blood pooling dark on the cracked ground. Jalen's ears rang, his body screaming. The sedan torched 2 blocks away, flames licking high as the mob scattered, bikes roaring off, leaving him bloody, broken, the alley a battlefield. Cops swarmed minutes later, their boots crunching debris. Karen striding from her cruiser, her wiry frame buzzing, her smirk wide as she watched officers haul Jalen up, his shoulder dripping, his head spinning. "Public disturbance inciting terror," she barked, cuffing him herself, her boots grinding glass, the steel cold and familiar as it bit his wrists. "Thought you were big now, huh? Not anymore," she hissed, slamming the cruiser door, his. Blood smearing the seat as Naya rushed to the scene, her scream piercing the night. "Let him go!" The cops shoved her back, her fierce eyes flooding as Jalen was hauled off, the precinct looming again, bail revoked by a judge swayed via phone. Too volatile, he provoked this. Simone arrived, her blazer flapping, her voice a roar. "This is assault, not his fault." But the system held, locking Jalen in a cell, the cot creaking under his bruised frame, his spirit fraying as the podcast's glow snuffed out. Karen leaned against her cruiser, her hazel eyes glinting as news vans spun Carter podcast sparks. Deadly blast, 5 lives gone, the senator's silent donation stalled. Too risky now, a donor texting pulling back. Jalen sat, blood crusted on his lip, the mob's bombs echoing, believing he'd built armor with his voice. But Karen and Roy had unleashed a beast, his car ash, his body battered, his name filth again. The precinct's bulb flickered, Naya's, scream a ghost in his skull, and he felt the fight slipping, the next strike a shadow he couldn't outrun. How's your heart holding up after this savage twist? Comment number 1 if you think Jalen's truth should have shielded him from this carnage. Smash that, like if Karen's bomb play has you reeling, and subscribe because tomorrow's chapter will turn this nightmare inside out. Share if you're raging for their survival. What's Karen plotting to bury Jalen deeper, and can Simone claw him out of this inferno? The ashes are still hot. Don't look away now. A week later, the Harris County Courthouse loomed over downtown Houston, its gray stone walls baking under a relentless August sun, the air inside thick with humidity and the restless hum of spectators. Jalen Carter sat at the defense table, his borrowed gray suit hanging loose on his battered frame, his broad shoulders tense under the weight of the past month's chaos, the stop, the raid, the rally's blood, the mob's bombs, all roads converging here. His wrists bore fresh scars from cuffs, his shoulder throbbing beneath a bandage Nia had taped that morning, her fierce eyes locked on him from the front row, her bandaged arm a stark reminder of their war. She twisted a tissue into knots, her braids pulled back tight, her slender frame rigid as she willed him strength, believing Simone Grant's sharp mind might still carve a path through the lies pinning him with manslaughter and terror charges. Jalen's steady gaze swept the room, a quiet fire flickering, hoping this was the end, that truth could still cut through. Across the aisle, Karen Voss adjusted her uniform, her wiry blonde hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights, her smirk, faint but etched deep, a predator savoring the kill. Roy Decker's pull had kept her badge intact, her suspension a fleeting shadow, and now she faced Jalen again, ready to bury him under a decade's sentence. The courtroom swelled with onlookers, reporters, scribbling in notepads, activists whispering behind cupped hands, the tension a live wire sparking in the still air. Judge Clarence Tate, a wiry man with a hawkish nose and silver hair, banged his gavel, the sound a dull thud silencing the buzz, his voice gravelly as he leaned forward. "Order! Let's wrap this. Counsel, your first witness." The prosecutor, Harold Pitts, a balding man with a weak chin and a nervous tic, stood smoothing his tie, his eyes glinting oily as he said, "The state calls Officer Karen Voss." Karen strode to the stand, her boots clicking sharp on the tile, her wiry frame rigid as she swore in, her hand resting light on the Bible she didn't believe in, her hazel eyes flicking to the jury. 12 faces, some bored, some skeptical, a mix of tight-lipped nods and furrowed brows. Pitts cleared his throat, pacing slow. "Officer Voss, walk us through the night of July 3rd when you encountered Jalen Carter." She leaned into the mic, her voice smooth as oil, dripping with rehearsed sincerity. "I was patrolling 3rd Ward around 8 p.m., saw the defendant driving slow, scoping out houses. I pulled him over, he got aggressive, shoved me, resisted arrest. I had to use force to subdue him." Her words landed heavy, a lie polished to shine, her gaze steady as she flicked it to the jury, watching a woman with a grey bun nod faint. A man with a buzz cut leaned forward. Jalen clenched his fists under the table, his jaw tight, nails digging into his palms as the fiction burned his ears. He hadn't shoved her, hadn't resisted, but the cuffs had left marks, and the crowd's cheers for her that night now twisted into his noose. Simone sat beside him, her pen tapping a rhythm on her legal pad, her sharp eyes tracking Karen's every twitch, her tailored blazer crisp despite the 90-degree heat seeping through the windows. Pitts nodded, his weak chin bobbing. "And this aggression, it matches the rally incident?" Karen straightened, her tone firm. "Yes, sir. He's got a temper, stirred up that crowd, caused a riot. People got hurt because of him. 2 dead, 30 injured." The jury shifted, a man with a goatee scribbling fast, a woman with glasses frowning, the room's air growing heavier as Pitts sat, satisfied, passing the baton to Simone, who rose like a storm brewing, her heels a quiet threat on the floor. "Officer." "Voss, let's talk facts, not fairy tales," Simone said, adjusting her glasses, her voice cutting the stillness like a whip crack. "So you say my client attacked you, resisted, but I've got something you might have overlooked." She clicked a remote, the courtroom screen flickering to life, dashcam footage rolling, Karen's cruiser tailing Jalen's pickup, her headlights glaring, her bark of hands on the car sharp as Jalen complied, her hands slamming him down, no shove, no fight, just her rage. Gasps rippled through the gallery, a juror with a grey beard leaning forward, eyes wide, the baggie slipping into Jalen's pocket, subtle but damning. Karen's smirk faltered, her fingers curling tight on the stand, her face flushing as she snapped. "That's edited," Simone pressed, her tone unrelenting. "Is it? We've got the raw file certified, no cuts. Want to explain why you lied under oath?" Karen's mouth opened, then shut, her breath shallow, as Simone turned to Tate, her voice thunder. "Your Honor, this disproves the assault claim. I move to dismiss it." Pitt stammered, "Objection, relevance." But Tate waved him off, his hawkish nose twitching, his gavel tapping light. "Overruled, I've seen enough. Assault charge dismissed." Jalen exhaled, a shudder of relief shaking his frame, his steady gaze softening as Nia's hand brushed his shoulder from behind, her whispered yes, barely audible over the murmurs. The gallery buzzed, reporters scribbling faster. A woman in a blue scarf clapping before a bailiff hushed her, the air lightening as Karen stepped down, her boots stomping harder, her glare slicing toward Jalen. He met it, unflinching, his chest loosening, thinking this was the first crack in their wall, that Simone's fire was dismantling them brick by brick. She sat, her smile tight, whispering, "One down, more to go." And for a moment, he believed the tide was turning, the truth slicing through. But Roy Decker wasn't in the room. He sat across town in a smoky diner off Alabama Street, his meaty hands wrapped around a coffee mug, his graying mustache twitching as he schemed Karen's mid-testimony text. "She's killing us," a spark in his gut. He'd slipped out. During the footage, his SUV roaring to the precinct, and now dialed Eddie Tatum, a jittery pawnshop owner with a patchy beard and a gambling debt Roy owned. "You're up," Roy growled, his voice low, Eddie's nervous croak crackling back. "You sure about this, Decker?" Roy's meaty hand tightened, his tone a snarl. "You owe me. Say what I told you, or you're done." Eddie nodded to no one in his cluttered back office, sweating through a stained shirt, pocketing the $500 Roy had slipped him earlier, a lie now his lifeline. By 3 p.m., Pitts called Eddie to the stand, his shoes scuffing the tile as he swore. His eyes darting to Roy's empty seat in the back, his patchy beard twitching. "State your name," Pitts said, pacing slow, and Eddie mumbled, "Edward Tatum, I run Tatum's Pawn on 10th Street. Pitts nodded, his oily smirk widening. "Tell us about Jalen Carter." Eddie licked his lips, his voice quavering. "Came into my shop June 29th, waving that Glock, said he'd shoot me if I didn't buy it. I ran him off." The courtroom erupted, whispers turning to shouts, a juror with a tight bun gasping, "What?" Jalen's head snapped up, his voice breaking free. "That's a lie, I've never been there." Tate banged his gavel, "Order!" But the damage landed, the jury's eyes narrowing, doubt creeping in like smoke. Simone leapt, her objection sharp. "No evidence, no corroboration," Pitt smirked, waving a flimsy receipt. "Witness testimony is evidence, counsel," he said, and Tate nodded. "Sustained, but I'll allow it. Jury weighs credibility." Simone grilled Eddie, her voice a blade. "Where's the security footage, police report?" Eddie squirmed, his patchy beard slick with sweat. "Camera's broken. Didn't call cops, too scared," he mumbled, his story thin as wet paper. But the jury didn't flinch. A man with a buzz cut nodding. "Sounds like him." Karen watched from the prosecution's side, her smirk returning. Roy's puppet dancing perfectly, the room tilting against Jalen as Eddie stepped down, his scuffing shoes a faint echo of the lie's weight. Jalen sank into his chair, his breath shallow, the dismissal a hollow win now, Eddie's fiction a fresh chain around his neck. Nia gripped the railing behind, her knuckles white, whispering, "He's making it up." But the jury didn't hear, their faces hardening, a woman with glasses scribbling fast, a man with a goatee glaring. Simone sat, her pen still, her voice, "So, we'll fight this, but it's bad." Pitts rested his case, smirking oily as Tate adjourned for the day, his gavel a dull thud, the crowd spilling out buzzing with, "He's guilty," and "Knew it." Jalen stood, his suit wrinkled, his calm cracking, believing he'd cleared a hurdle with the footage, but Karen's move had slammed a new door shut, a weapons charge looming uglier than the rally's blood. Karen met Roy later in that diner, her beer clinking his coffee, her wiry frame buzzing with glee. "Told you I'd get him," she said, her hazel eyes glinting, and Roy nodded, his meaty hand slapping the table. "Round one's ours. Round two's gonna hurt more." Jalen slumped on his couch in his mind, the late heat seeping through. Nia's bandaged arm a ghost beside him, the trial's hope a mirage he couldn't hold, Karen's lie a blade he hadn't dodged. 2 days after the trial's crushing blow, Huntsville Prison loomed 90 miles north of Houston, a sprawling concrete fortress baking under an August sun, its barbed wire glinting like teeth in the haze. Jalen Carter shuffled into a cell block, his orange jumpsuit stiff against his bruised skin, his broad shoulders hunched under the weight of a 10-year sentence for assault and manslaughter, Karen Voss's doctored photos, and Eddie Tatum's lie sealing his fate. His wrists bore raw scars, his shoulder a swollen knot beneath a bandage Nia had taped before the transport, her fierce eyes flooding as she'd clung to him through the precinct glass, whispering, "We'll appeal." The cell was a 6x8 box, walls slick with sweat and despair, the air stale with the musk of unwashed bodies, and Jalen sank onto a metal bunk, his steady gaze tracing the bars, believing Simone Grant's vow might still claw him out, that the community's flicker of support could burn through this cage. The block buzzed with late-shift chaos, guards barking orders, radios squawking, inmates muttering low as Jalen sat, his close-cropped hair damp under the flickering bulb. His grey suit swapped for the jumpsuit's coarse orange, a stark mark of his fall. Word had spread fast, guards whispering "cop hater" as they'd shoved him in, their boots echoing off the tile, eyes glinting with a quiet malice that set his nerves tight. He'd heard it in processing, a wiry guard with a scarred lip, sneering. "Carter, huh? You're the one who stirred up that riot, twisting the rally's blood into his crime." Jalen kept his jaw locked, his steady gaze forward. Knowing silence was his shield, but the air thickened with a threat he couldn't name, a storm brewing in the shadows of the tiered bunks and rusted pipes overhead. Across Houston, Captain Roy. Decker sat in his precinct office, the blinds shut tight, his beefy frame hunched over a desk littered with crumpled flyers, his graying mustache twitching as he dialed a burner phone. Karen Voss's trial win had been a hammer, but Jalen's breath still fouled his air, and Roy wasn't done. He'd paid off a guard earlier, a lanky man named Hicks with a gambling debt and a taste for blood, slipping him $200 in a gas station lot. "Carter's in Huntsville," Roy growled, his meaty hand gripping the phone. "Get some boys to shank him, make it messy." Hicks rasped back, "Got it, boss," his voice a hiss, and Roy smirked, picturing Jalen bleeding out on the yard, his crooked grin flashing as he hung up, the plan a blade sharpened by spite. Noon the yard buzzed with inmates, the sun searing the cracked concrete as Jalen stepped out, his sneakers scuffing the dust, his jumpsuit clinging to his sweat-slicked chest. Guards lounged on the perimeter, Hicks among them, his lanky frame leaning against a fence, eyes glinting as he nodded to 3 inmates, hulking men with shaved heads and swastika ink curling up their arms, their fists scarred from fights Roy's cash had fueled. They moved fast, circling Jalen near the weight racks, their boots grinding gravel, a pipe glinting in one's hand as he sneered, "Cop killer, huh?" Jalen's steady gaze narrowed, his broad frame tensing as he backed up, hands raised. "I didn't kill nobody," he said, his voice low, steady. But the biggest thug lunged, a blade flashing from his sleeve, slicing Jalen's ribs in a quick, vicious arc, blood welling fast through the orange fabric. Pain exploded, a white-hot roar in his side as Jalen stumbled, his sneakers slipping on the dust, his shoulder slamming the concrete as the second thug kicked his legs out, boots thudding hard against his shins, bone bruising under the force. "That's for the rally." "Punk," the kicker spat, his swastika tattoo flexing as he swung a pipe, cracking Jalen's elbow, the snap a dull echo in the yard's din. Jalen rolled, blood soaking his jumpsuit, his steady gaze clouding as the third thug loomed, blade raised, but a guard's whistle split the air, Hicks, playing clean, barking, "Break it up," to cover his tracks. The trio scattered, melting, into the crowd, leaving Jalen crumpled, his breath ragged, blood pooling dark on the grey slab, his mind reeling as he clutched his ribs, the wound deep, jagged, a message carved in flesh. Nia visited that afternoon, her fierce eyes flooding behind the scratched glass, her bandaged arm trembling as she pressed her hand to it, seeing Jalen wheeled in, his jumpsuit swapped for a bloody gown, bandages wrapping his ribs, his elbow in a sling. "Oh God," she choked, her voice breaking, her slender frame shaking in a white tee and jeans, her braids swaying as she leaned close. "They can't do this." Jalen nodded, his voice a rasp through the phone, pain threading every word. "I'm alive," he said, his steady gaze locking on hers, believing her presence might hold him up, that Simone could turn this into a retrial lifeline. "Tell her," he added, his chest heaving, "they're killing me in here." Nia's sob cracked the air, her fierce eyes burning with a vow as she nodded, clutching the receiver like it could pull him through the bars. Simone dug in that night, her office a warren of files off Main Street, her sharp eyes bloodshot as she called a contact, a biker named Trey, lean and twitchy, who'd flipped on Roy after the alley bombs. Saw Decker pay Duke $500. To torch Carter's truck, Trey rasped over the line, his voice a lifeline she'd guarded since the podcast blast. She filed an emergency motion by midnight, her heels pacing the tile, arguing, "New witness, prison assault proves targeting," and got a retrial hearing set. Her tailored blazer rumpled, but her fire unbowed. Jalen heard it through a guard's. Relayed call the next morning, his bunk creaking as he sat, blood seeping through fresh bandages, hope flickering faint. "We've got a shot," Simone said, her voice crackling through static, and he believed it. Picturing the courtroom, Trey's words swaying the jury, thinking he might claw back from this hell that Nia's tears could dry. But Karen wasn't resting. She sat in her cruiser off Huntsville's edge, her wiry blonde hair slick with sweat, her hazel eyes glinting as she scrolled Trey's rap sheet on her phone, a petty theft bust Roy had buried, now ripe for leverage. She'd clocked Simone's. Filings sniffed the biker's betrayal and struck fast, driving to his flophouse at dawn, a sagging shack off FM 1960. She banged the door, her boots grinding gravel, Trey opening bleary-eyed, his lean frame shrinking in a stained tank top. "You're talking," she hissed, shoving a forged warrant in his face, her voice a blade. "Decker says hi. Burned Carter's witness house, didn't you?" Trey's eyes widened, his twitchy hands trembling. "I didn't," he stammered, but she smirked, pulling a photo of his kid, a 5-year-old girl, from her pocket. "Testify it was Carter's gang, or she's next," she said, her tone icy, final. He crumpled, nodding. "Okay, okay," his voice a whisper, broken by her shadow. That night, Trey's shack went up in flames, a Molotov cocktail shattering the window, fire roaring through the thin walls, his screams cut short as the roof caved, his charred body found by dawn, a gas can planted nearby stamped with Carter's crew. Karen called Roy from her apartment, her wiry frame buzzing, the fan rattling as she smirked. "Witness is Ash, pinned it on Carter," she said, her hazel eyes glinting, and Roy chuckled, his meaty hand clinking a beer in his office. "He's buried now," he growled, picturing Jalen's retrial crumbling. News hit by morning, Carter linked to witness murder. The retrial motion stalled. Simone's voice a roar over the phone to Jalen. "They're framing you deeper." He sat in his cell, blood crusting his gown, the shank's sting a fie. Ghost in his ribs, believing Trey's words were his ladder out. But Karen had torched it, the judge's cold insufficient evidence, a hammer dropping from miles away. Jalen slumped, his bunk creaking, Nia's sobs echoing through the glass in his mind, the prison's damp air choking his hope. He'd thought the yard was the worst, that Simone's witness could lift him. But this was a grave dug fresh, his name a curse. The fight slipping as Karen's grip tightened, Roy's shadow a wall he couldn't climb, the next blow a promise he couldn't brace for. The Huntsville prison cell block simmered under a late August dusk, the air thick with sweat, and the faint tang of bleach as Jalen Carter slumped on his sagging bunk, his orange jumpsuit stiff with dried blood, his broad shoulders hunched under the crushing weight of a 10-year sentence. The shank's sting lingered in his ribs, a jagged wound beneath bandages that seeped red, his elbow throbbing in a sling from the yard's brutal beating days ago. Trey's charred death, the witness who'd flipped on Roy Decker, had torched. His retrial hope, the news spinning Carter's gang burns witness a lie that added murder to his name, stalling Simone Grant's motion in a judge's cold dismissal. His close-cropped hair glistened with sweat, his steady gaze dulled by the flickering bulb overhead, believing Nia's vow through the glass, "I'll fight for you," might still hold, but the damp walls closed tighter, a coffin he couldn't claw out of. Across the prison, Captain Roy Decker schemed from his Houston precinct office, his beefy frame sprawled in a creaking chair, his graying mustache twitching as he sipped a beer, the blinds shut against the city's glow. Karen Voss's trial win and Trey's ashes weren't enough. Jalen's breath still fouled his air, a loose thread in their empire of lies. He'd staged a riot that morning, slipping $50 to Hicks, the lanky guard, whispering, "Make Carter the ringleader," in a precinct lot at dawn. Hicks had rallied inmates, swastika-inked thugs from the yard, promising extra rations, and by noon, the block erupted, fists smashing bunks, pipes clanging bars, a chaos Roy spun into Jalen's crime. He incited it, Roy growled over a burner phone to a judge's clerk, his meaty hand crushing the can, adding 20 years to Jalen's sentence by dusk, the order swift. Riot leader, too dangerous. Jalen sat oblivious, his bunk creaking as the riot's echo faded, believing the shank was the worst, that Simone's next move might lift him, unaware of the noose tightening. In Houston, Nia drove her sedan through the Third Ward's dusk, her fierce eyes red from sleepless nights, her bandaged arm aching as she headed to Mercy Hospital, begging for her job back after the threats had faded. She'd patched Jalen's wounds in her mind, swept glass from their kitchen, clung to Simone's will appeal. But the air shifted, a quiet too heavy, as she turned onto MLK Boulevard. A shadow loomed, a pickup truck tailing her, its headlights glaring, and before she could react, a bomb thudded from its window, shattering her sedan's rear glass in a deafening blast. The car spun, metal crumpling as flames roared, her leg pinned under the dash, snapping jagged as she screamed, blood pooling fast on the seat. The truck peeled off, tires screeching into the night, Roy's hired thug, a wiry ex-con named Leon, grinning as he vanished. The blast a final blow Karen had greenlit from her cruiser miles away. Nia's cry pierced the dusk, neighbors spilling. From porches, phones flashing as they dialed, sirens wailing faint in the distance. Her leg twisted at a sickening angle, her fierce eyes clouding with pain as she clawed at the door, glass cutting her palms, her white tee soaking crimson. "Jalen," she gasped, her voice breaking, believing he'd hear her somehow, that their fight could endure this fire. Cops swarmed, their boots crunching debris. A stocky officer with a crew cut barking, "Get her out!" Medics pulling her free, her screams roar as they strapped her to a stretcher, blood dripping onto the asphalt. News vans circled by 9, spinning Carter's wife bombed gang retaliation. The lie landing hard as neighbors whispered, "They're cursed," their faith snuffed out by the flames licking the sedan's husk. Jalen felt it in his cell, a jolt in his gut as a guard relayed the call from Simone, her voice crackling through static at midnight. "Nia's hit, bomb, legs bad." His rage boiled, fists slamming the bunk, the metal groaning as he roared, "They're killing us!" His steady gaze shattered, tears streaking his face. The shank's pain a whisper against this wound. Nia, his rock, broken by their hands. Karen visited an hour later, her boots echoing off the tile, her wiry frame leaning close to the bars, her hazel eyes glinting with a venomous purr. "Told you I'd win, Carter," she hissed, her smirk sharp, savoring his bloodshot glare. "You're mine forever." He stared back silent, his chest heaving, rage and grief warring in his bones, believing he'd shield Nia, but she'd burned instead, their home a memory, their fight a ghost. Simone's evidence vanished that night. A precinct fire Roy set at 2 a.m., flames roaring through the evidence locker off Main Street, the recorder's backup melting into ash, Trey's files a pile of soot. Hicks had tipped Roy, Simone's motion loomed too close, and Roy struck lighter fluid-soaking boxes, a match sparking the blaze, the night guard too scared to talk. By dawn, news hit. Fire destroys Carter case evidence, the retrial. A mirage now, Simone's voice a howl over the phone to Jalen, "They've burned it all." He sat, his bunk creaking, Nia's leg a jagged scar in his mind, the riots 20 years doubling his sentence, the judge's call swift via clerk. Life now too volatile. Tate's ruling landed at noon, his hawkish nose twitching over the phone, swayed by Roy's Carter's a kingpin lie, the fire's timing a perfect alibi. Jalen collapsed, his broad frame crumpling, his jumpsuit soaked with sweat and blood, the cell's damp air choking his breath. Nia lay in a hospital bed miles away, her leg in a cast, her fierce eyes dull as morphine dulled the pain, her sob a whisper through the phone to Simone. "What's happening to us?" He'd heard it relayed, his voice gone, his steady gaze lost to the bars, believing he'd rise from the shank, that Nia's fight could carry them, but this was annihilation, riot, bomb, fire, a triple blow he couldn't brace for. The community's flicker died, activist funds dry, neighbors turning away, their sedan ash, their lives a battlefield razed by Karen's iron grip and Roy's shadow. He pictured her smirk, Roy's chuckle, their empire unbowed. and felt his spirit fracture, the fight bleeding out on the cold concrete. Karen and Roy met at a gas station lot that night, her cruiser idling beside his SUV, the air thick with exhaust. As she leaned against the hood, her wiry frame buzzing with triumph. "He's broken," she said, her hazel eyes glinting, sipping a beer Roy handed her, the can sweating in her grip. Roy grinned, his meaty hand slapping the wheel, his greying mustache twitching. "Not yet," he growled. "Next one finishes." "Him?" Savoring the hospital's news clip. Naya's bombed car, Jalen's life sentence, a victory carved in blood and ash. Jalen sat in his cell, the bulb flickering, replaying Naya's scream, the riot's chaos, the fire's roar, believing. It was over. His family shattered. His freedom a ghost, unaware of the final strike Roy was sharpening, a guillotine poised to drop. The Harris County courthouse simmered under an early September sun, its grey stone walls radiating heat, as Jalen Carter shuffled into an emergency hearing, his orange jumpsuit swapped for a crisp black suit, his wrists raw from cuffs that had chained him through a month of hell in Huntsville prison. His broad shoulders squared despite the weight, ribs scarred from a shank, elbow stiff in a sling, a life sentence for assault, manslaughter, and a riot Roy Decker had pinned on him, compounded by Nia's bombed leg and the precinct fire that torched Simone Grant's evidence. Nia sat in the front row, her fierce eyes locked on him from a wheelchair, her casted leg a stark testament to their war, her braids glinting under the fluorescent glow, her slender hands clutching the arms, tight, believing this last-ditch motion might free him. Jalen's steady gaze swept the room, a quiet fire reigniting, sensing a shift he couldn't name. A thread from the clerk's sealed file days ago, Judge Tate's pale paws still dangling in his mind. Karen Voss sat with Harold Pitts, her wiry blonde hair slick with sweat, her uniform crisp, her smirk a thin line as she adjusted her badge, Roy's pull keeping her untouchable despite the riot, the bombs, the fire. The gallery buzzed, reporters poised with pens, activists hushed, in hope, the air thick with humidity and tension as Tate banged his gavel, his silver hair wild, his hawkish nose twitching. "Order, let's move," he growled, clutching the sealed file, his voice gravelly as he nodded to Simone. "Counsel your motion." Simone rose, her tailored blazer rumpled, her sharp eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights, her heels clicking, as she slid papers across. "New evidence, Your Honor, clears my client of all charges," she said, her voice thunder, but Pitts leapt, his weak chin quivering. "Last-minute nonsense." Tate waved him off. "We'll hear it," his tone iron, the room holding its breath. Jalen stood, his black suit stark against the wood-paneled walls, his steady gaze locking on Tate as guards flanked him, cuffs clanking soft, his voice rising calm, deliberate, a chill rippling through the space. "I'm Agent Jalen Carter, FBI, undercover for 5 years, he said, the words a bomb detonating the air, a collective gasp sucking oxygen from the room. Karen's face drained to ash, her hazel eyes bulging, her wiry frame stiffening as Pitts choked on a cough, his oily smirk vanishing. The guard stepped back, hands twitching to holsters, Tate's jaw dropping as Jalen pressed on, his tone steady as stone. "I've been in Houston infiltrating police corruption, targeting Captain Roy Decker and Officer Karen Voss. That stop, the gun, the rally, the mob, it was my sting. I've got it all." The room erupted, shouts bouncing off the walls, AIE guard muttering "no way," reporters scrambling as Simone grinned, her sharp eyes glinting, the puzzle snapping into place. Karen lunged, her boots scuffing, her voice a rasp. "He's lying." But Jalen raised a hand, silencing her, his steady gaze piercing her pale terror. "Check the file, Judge," he said, his words a command. His broad shoulders lifting as Tate tore open the envelope, papers spilling. An FBI badge gleaming gold, a DOJ letterhead stamped with orders. Agent Jalen Carter, assigned to document misconduct. Evidence submitted, recordings, witnesses corroborated. Tate's voice shook, his silver hair trembling as he read, 5 years undercover, targeting systemic corruption in Houston PD. His hawkish eyes flicked to Jalen, then, Karen, the gallery roaring as Naya pushed forward, her wheelchair creaking, tears flooding her fierce eyes. "Jalen," she cried, her hands reaching, cuffs clanking as he caught her grip, whispering, "It's over," his steady gaze softening, the truth, a tidal wave crashing through. Karen staggered, her wiry frame buckling. "No, no, this can't." Her voice, broken hiss, Pitts collapsing into his chair, moaning, "We're done," his weak chin trembling. Jalen turned to Tate, his tone cold, precise. "You thought you broke me, Voss, but I've been breaking you. Every move recorded, every lie caught." Simone stormed forward, her heels a victory march, papers in hand. "I knew it, kept it quiet, fed me the tape. Brilliant," she said, her grin wide, revealing she'd been his cover, not his savior. Her legal fire a shield for his sting. Tate banged his gavel, the thud a thunderclap. "Charges dismissed. Voss and Decker under arrest. Federal review starts now." His voice iron as guards turned, cuffing Karen, her wrists twisting. "You can't!" she screamed, but they could. Her badge ripped off, her smirk gone, her pale face a mask of terror as Roy was hauled in from the hall, his meaty hands cuffed, his greying mustache quivering. "Set up," he growled, but Jalen stepped close, his voice lethal. 10 years of brutality. I've got files, tapes, witnesses. You're finished." The room spun, reporters shouting FBI twist. Cops busted. As the sting unveiled a decade of rot, recordings from drops beyond the burned tape, witnesses flipping like dominoes. Duke, the biker, spilled under pressure in a holding cell. "Decker paid me $500 to torch the truck," his scarred hands trembling. Leon, the bomber, caught on tape in a sting Jalen had baited months ago. Roy ordered the blasts, his wiry frame shrinking under cuffs. Files flooded in from a safe house Jalen had guarded, a warehouse off Howell Mill untouched by Roy's fire. Bank records, call logs, every stop, every frame, every death a thread in a web he'd woven. Tate ordered a full DOJ investigation. "Cooperate or face contempt," his gavel a final crack, Karen collapsing, her knees buckling. "I didn't know," she whimpered, but Jalen loomed, his steady gaze cold. "You knew enough, enjoyed it." Her real tears now terror, not triumph. Roy glaring, "You'll pay." But Jalen smiled, faint, lethal. "Already did, now it's your turn." He walked free, Nia at his side, her wheelchair rolling smooth, the courthouse steps warm under his sneakers as he swapped the suit for jeans Simone had brought, the air sweet with possibility. The crowd parted, some cheering, others stunned. A reporter yelling, "Agent Carter!" But he waved them off, his arm around Nia. "Home," he said, and she nodded, her fierce eyes shining, the nightmare peeling away, his cover blown, his mission complete. Karen and Roy were led out, cuffed, heads low, her pale face a ghost, his empire ash, the system they'd gamed now their cage. At home, the plywood window still hung, but the air felt lighter. Nia brewing coffee, her casted leg propped. "You're safe," she said, and he nodded. "We are." The sedan's loss a scar, the fight a memory, but justice a weight lifted. They sat, dusk settling over the Third Ward, Jalen leaning close, his voice a whisper. "Congress is next. I've got leads," his steady gaze glinting. "A vow beyond Houston, a bigger war looming." Nia's hand tightened in his. Together, and he smiled. "Always." The sting closed, but the hunter unbowed, the system's rot running deep, a chase he'd pursue relentless. He'd played them, every arrest a step, every blow a trap, rising. From their ashes, not theirs from his cover a blade that cut their empire down. Karen's pale collapse burned in his mind, a triumph he'd forged through blood and patience, the fight ending here, but a new one whispering on the horizon, his spirit unbroken, his family whole. This gripping tale of Jalen Carter unveils raw truths about resilience, systemic injustice, and the power of cunning against overwhelming odds. First, Jalen's story teaches perseverance. He endured brutal stops, false arrests, a mob's wrath and prison violence, yet never surrendered, his quiet strength a beacon for anyone facing relentless adversity. His undercover role as an FBI agent shows that holding fast to integrity, even when the world turns against you, can carve a path to redemption. Second, It exposes the deep rot of corruption. Karen Voss and Roy Decker wielded their badges as weapons, planting evidence, bombing lives, and burning truth. A stark reminder that authority can cloak tyranny, urging vigilance to challenge it. Their downfall proves that no empire of lies stands forever when faced with unwavering resolve. Third, the cost of silence cuts deep. Naya's suffering, the community's wavering faith, and Tyrell's betrayal highlight how fear or inaction fuels injustice, pushing us to speak out even when it's hard. Jalen's patience, turning every blow into a trap, underscores the power of strategy. 5 years of calculated moves toppled giants, proving that cunning can outlast brute force. Finally, this saga reflects the personal toll of fighting systemic evil. Nia's bombed leg, Jalen's scars, yet their bond endured, a testament to love's strength in chaos. It's a mirror to our battles, showing that justice demands sacrifice but rewards the relentless with victory. What's your takeaway from Jalen's war against corruption? Comment below if you believe standing up to racist systems is worth the fight. Hit like if his twist stunned you, and subscribe for more tales of justice rising from ashes. Share if this moved you to act. Thanks for joining this journey through Houston's shadows. Your support fuels these stories. May you find courage to confront your own storms and wisdom to see truth through the dark.